Okay, so we have started
A new year.
New Year and stewardship.
Yeah.
I've never liked that word.
Yeah. It's one of those churchy words.
Well, it's a churchy word, and like I always think of the steward of Gondor, and like there's just that's the nerd coming out of me.
Yeah.
It's just, and it doesn't feel like a word that has positive connotation. It just feels like I know it's essentially like your job is to steward something, meaning take care of it.
Right.
I get that, but just there's something about when I was a little kid, I always thought that there was something going on with a guy named Stewart, and then I kind of understood it just has something to do with money,
Right.
and then I fully understood it, but then I associated it with the Steward of Gondor, and just it more often than not comes down as to like something with negative connotation.
Yeah.
And I know it's not. It's literally just how we responsibly handle our finances as a church body. But what do you think it would take to shift the general narrative that stewardship is this like, oh gosh, we're in the season of stewardship again? How do we shift that as a church? From it's almost like a cultural thing.
So, I mean, my approach to it has always been, because I said this yesterday and I'll say it every time we do. I really love talking about money, and not just money, but our resources, our time and our energy, because I think that those are things that impact our everyday life. And the number of times I hear people say, when I'll ask, like, what are you looking for in a sermon? Or what do you like about coming to church? A lot of people will say, I like when I either hear a sermon or hear a Sunday school lesson or find some way to directly apply my faith to my life. And sometimes it's nice just to hear something that's interesting. You learn about some church history or some theology thing that's not really applicable to day-to-day life. It's just interesting. There's value in that. But primarily people are looking for, how do I make my faith relevant to my life? And this is an area that is probably more relevant than almost anything to our life is fundamentally, how do we make decisions in our life? How do we decide how we're going to spend our time, how we're going to spend our energy, how we're going to spend our resources, how we make decisions as individuals and as a church? How do we make decisions about where we're going to put the church's energy and the church's resources? Because you can't do everything. And I think I've been a part of a lot of churches, and it's sort of the classic joke about the problem with most Methodist churches is they try to be everything to everyone. And so they have a small group for everything and a class for everything, and you're spread a mile wide and an inch deep. And that's the struggle. Is it's tough to say no, or it's tough to, not offer something, but at some point you've stretched yourself too thin. And so I think that this is a topic that people often avoid for a million reasons. It's awkward, or they don't want to talk about it, or, that's just not something that's necessarily exciting for people to get into. But I think that's a struggle, because that usually means people aren't usually doing it on their own. They're not usually looking at their calendar and their scheduling and like how they divide their time, or what they're teaching their kids about, the way you handle your finances or the way you make decisions in your life. Some people definitely are, but a lot of people, God is sort of separate from that. And so trying to integrate those things, I think, really matters. But what I've always tried to do is to talk about just to bring a hopeful and excited energy to it and to take away the fear. And that's what I've realized is money and, being overscheduled and being busy, a lot of those things, they draw a lot of their kind of nefarious power in our life because we're afraid to talk about it, or we don't get educated on it, or it's just awkward. And so we avoid it. And in that, that's where, the bad habits form, and that's where the waste happens, and that's where mistakes can be made because we just don't know any better. A lot of people will go buy a car, they've never done it before, and they're kind of embarrassed to ask somebody how to do that, and so they get a bad deal, or they buy a car they can't afford or something because we're ashamed and awkward to ask someone for help, or how to write a budget. We don't want people to see how we spend our money or how much money we make, and so we usually get into trouble. And that's just the logistics of it. That doesn't even get into how does God want us to make decisions? What happens if you bring your faith into your finances? What does it really mean to be generous? There's also a really big, I think, misunderstanding when you look scripturally at what does generosity really look like, the difference between a tithe and an offering. We'll get into some of that this Sunday. We're talking about generosity, and just, I think a lot of times people equate any gift they give to any non-denomination or any nonprofit or any church, like we would call that, a gift or an offering, or we're being very generous. But if you look in scripture, like the tithe was the floor, like that was the minimum everybody gave, and it came in different forms. Sometimes people would give like a tenth of their crops, or they would bring a tenth of their cattle. It wasn't always like cash like it is today, but it was always 10% was like the minimum, because that's what supported things. And then anything above that was an offering. Well, we've conflated all those things today. And so
Everything's an offering.
Everything's an offering. And so it is funny because sometimes, we'll talk about, people are being so generous when like they wouldn't even qualify for the minimum of biblical times. And so that's where like I try to make some of those jokes, and I will on Sunday, to say like, a lot of times I'll hear people say, well, just tell me what the Bible says. And I'm like, you don't want to hear what the Bible says when it comes to giving. But there's also a breakdown there too, because like church and state wasn't separate. And so a lot of like tithing to the temple also provided services that today the government provides. And so like taxes and tithing, I mean, when you get into the Roman Empire, that's a little different because that's a little separate. But like in the Old Testament, like that was all combined in the organization of your tribe or, of your nation. And there's a temple tax, and everything kind of goes in there because religion and the national interests were one thing. So it's not one-to-one. It's apples and oranges in a lot of ways to look at how scripture talks about some of these things versus how modern American economy and taxes and, charitable giving and all this works. But at the end of the day, the way I think that this, to give you a very long answer to your very simple question, was I think that it's about changing your perspective. And that's what I try to do, like yesterday, about setting the tone of saying, like, I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. I'm not trying to, beg for money. I'm not trying to, make any threats or, anything that's going to make people feel judged or shame about whatever they're doing. I'm trying to let people know, one, like what is expected of us as followers of Christ. And if you have a problem with that, you have a problem with Jesus, not me. So, and I can't help you with that. Like, you're going to have to reconcile how you feel about that, but it's not me or the church you have a problem with. It's scripture. A lot of people don't, they don't want to go down that road, but there are requirements and expectations of us as followers of Christ.
It's easier to live in ignorance of like what the Bible is actually calling you to do.
Well, and like, scriptural expectations of discipleship versus like what we see modern churches, expect to require vary wildly depending on what denomination you're in. But mostly I try to get at, how is generosity good for your soul? How are we created to live? And if we can live into that, it's better for us. So I try to frame it not in the sense of, we need you to make this sacrifice so the church can exist. It's more in the sense of, if we live into the way God created us to live, it's better for us, and the church can do more things. And together we can find that abundant life individually and corporately. But that can be a hard sell, because a lot of times it comes across when people have to actually write the check as, I've got to cut something else because I don't just have this cash laying around, or I've got to make some adjustments. But I think if we take our faith seriously, I don't know how you avoid this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was funny because last year did a series of videos, and in one of them we filmed Randy Sutherland, and he said this thing last year that I had never heard anybody say before, and it stuck with me. And it was entirely like, just, he wrote his own script, and he said, he was talking about generosity and how it's what separates us from the animals, because animals don't do generosity. Like if a lion by itself or whatever kills, a water buffalo, that's that lion's water buffalo. And any other, like hyenas come, like, no, I'll kill you to keep what I just. They fight for it. If vultures come in, they're gonna fight each other to get a piece of that meat. They don't, outside of mothers feeding their offspring. The animal kingdom doesn't really have generosity. That's not a thing. It's get yours to survive. And so when he said it's what separates us from the animals, I was like, I've never thought of it that way. That is crazy that I've never put those two things together. But we're the only species that actively incorporates generosity in that sense.
Yeah, well, and it's a part of our command in creation. So if you read, so we talked, our theme verse is Genesis 1:27, which is you were made in the image of God. God created them in God's image. They were created. And so what does that mean? Well, if you look at basically, the first things that God tells us that we're in charge of, or what we're supposed to do, it's be fruitful and multiply, and it's to have dominion over the earth. And so we're kind of put in charge of stewarding creation and caring for all of this that God gave us. Yeah, exactly. And so it's built into who we are and what we are to God is we are the ones that God entrusted with all of this, with each other, with the world, with animals, with all of creation in the sense of that. And so I think that's where a lot of people they sort of say, well, it's not my job. It's not my job to care for this person. It's not my job to care for them. And that's where you get the parables where people felt the same way. And that's where, you get the response to, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus starts to tell the parable of the Good Samaritan. It says, love the Lord your God. So the scribes ask him, what's the most important law? And he gives them the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And the lawyer responds and says, well, who's my neighbor? And then he tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. And so I think that's where we have this, well, it's not my job, or why should I care for them? I'm going to do what's best for me. And a lot of the metaphors that we use today, especially like in business or in personality typing, are animal metaphors. So we say like, well, you got to be a shark if you're going to, survive in business, or you got to be like a lion, or you got to be a bear, or you got to be whatever. And we associate
predator,
it's all, yeah, exactly. It's always a predator. And if it's not, then it's like you're weak or you're less than or whatever. It's like, well, you're more like a monkey. And it's like, a monkey? Don't call me like, you're like a butterfly. And they're like, oh, come on, I'm a butterfly. So a lot of people get offended because they think it's competitive. But I think that in itself is pretty revealing as a misunderstanding of what and who we are. Because if we are trying to, sort of use an animal that is cognitively way, less cognitive ability than we have, and also is just operating on instinct, that shouldn't be what we aspire to be. We shouldn't aspire to be a shark that just exists to survive. Like that's all it does. It swims, it eats, it reproduces, the end. It doesn't it's not like opening up a, shark cafe in the, Bikini Bottom or whatever. Like, I mean, that's not, we make cartoons about that, but like SpongeBob's not real. So I think that's where we sort of take, we kind of go in the wrong direction, and we aspire to be whatever we've kind of seen in these predatory. And I think that says a lot about ourselves, that we sort of idolize and embody the idea of being a predator instead of looking at, we were created to be caretakers of one another and caretakers and flourish in all of that. It doesn't mean the competition's bad. It doesn't mean, all those other things that you have to, be a babysitter for God's creation or whatever. But I think when you look at the words that get associated with God, it's things like, caretaker, potter, gardener, architect. It's a lot of these things that create, build, care for, renew, construct, build up. And a lot of the things that we use, a lot of that terminology are things that attack, hunt, tear down, destroy. Well, you got to be a monster if you're going to get it. It's like, why are we aspiring to be monsters and sharks and like all these aggressive things where it's pitting us against our neighbor? And I think that's why, the call scripture is so difficult. And I think that that's where you have to look at the way you make decisions and the way you handle your finances. Because I talked about like keeping up with the Joneses, a lot of the way that we make decisions and purchases and the way we track people's net worth and all of this is we're in competition. And our status or our wealth or our whatever is kind of a way that we measure our success against others. And we've pitted ourselves in this human, rat race and competition. And that's not how God intended for us to see each other. And I think that's the battle we're fighting against.
Well, we also don't teach finance in our standard education system at all. I mean, what's the meme? It says, I never was taught in school how to do my taxes, but thank God I know the Pythagorean theorem.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I
agree.
I've always found that I can count on one hand the amount of memories I have of being taught or attempted to being taught like how to like budget something. And it was basically just a simple math equation. Like, you have $2,000. Here's all the things you need. Figure out how much you want to spend on each one. I'm like, with zero consequences, no matter how you do it. And then they might come on and say, well, you're spending a little much on food there. Like, or whatever.
Well, and it's tough because a lot of people don't know how to budget. They don't know how their finances work. They don't know how to make wise decisions and make investments. And you're right, we don't teach it. And and this is something that I've seen in raising my own kids, is there's such a disconnect as you grow up between sort of the rhythm of life and the things you do when you're younger. And then college, if you go to college, is kind of its own weird thing. But it's odd to me that, one of the hardest things for young people when they grow up is like they lose summer. They don't like summer's not a thing anymore. You have a job, you work all
Unless
the time.
you're a teacher.
Yeah, exactly. But that's also tough on their schedule too. And so I wish we would, not have a one giant long summer break and break it up throughout the year and teach people rhythm and balance and taking breaks in different spaces throughout the year.
Well, that's another thing. There were a lot of things that started to come out probably about 8 years ago is when I remember starting to see them. And where there were major studies done that we are the most unhealthy country in the world when it comes to our work to non-work life balance. It's terrible. We're way off. Terrible. We don't take our time off that we've earned.
Right.
And we feel this pressure to constantly work. And when we do take our time off, we've been intrinsically taught somehow to feel guilty about not working and things like that just. And then you look at Germany, who's apparently got it all figured out, and they take off compared to us, some absurd amount of days off in the year, or their things like maternity leave in Germany is a year, and paternity leave is 6 months. Mm-hmm. So if you have a baby, that whole family's out for a while.
Right. Yeah. It's just built into it.
And then in America, there's no laws to either of those things.
Well, I just think it's tough because with our kids, so much of the loss of, kids who fall behind in school, it usually happens over the summer because they're out for 3 straight months.
Yeah.
Most of them aren't doing anything. And that's what I saw some study that talked about we focus so much on class size for the quality of education. And a lot of the reports in the study were saying that they've noticed that one of the strongest markers, especially when kids are younger, for academic performance is, do they engage in it over the summer? Do they have parents that work with them over the summer? Because it's the drop off. Because if you don't do anything for 3 months, the teachers have to spend the first month or two just trying to bring everybody back up. And that's not how anything else works in life. It makes careers weird for teachers because then they've got this weird time off. And
I always thought that
it's all odd.
The big block school scheduling where you're basically going 3 weeks on, a week off, a month and a half on, rhythm, 2 weeks off.
A different rhythm. And also bring back the life skills in school. And I couldn't agree more. And there's a lot more now than there was before. One of our youth here was telling me about he's in a research methods class, and they have like architecture and digital design. They've got all kinds of stuff. I mean, when I was in school, you had math and science and English, like that was it. And so now they do have a lot more diversity in that, but it's more about setting up like your major in college than it is teaching you how to be a functional human being. And I think that's where like learning basic human life skills, and I think a lot of that comes with, financial skills, how to make decisions, and just kind of how to be an adult in the world. One of the things that I was told when I was young that really I didn't appreciate it at the time, but later in life I absolutely realized was true. Somebody told me when I was a kid, in all the conversations when you're young or when you're about to graduate high school, like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And what are you going to do? And who are you going to, all those, where's your life going or what's your life trajectory? And I was like, I don't know. Like, it just feels weird to think about being an adult. And the advice that's given to me is you're going to realize you're an adult about 30 decisions into being an adult. You're like, you don't wake up one day and now you're an adult. Because a lot of times people think like the age is 18. Well, for most people, they're still in high school when they turn 18. Science tells us that our brains aren't finished developing until we're like 26. So then there's not like a day when all of a sudden you're an adult. And a lot of times you don't realize like you've already made decisions that have consequences.
It's life though. I know some people who their life was way harder than I can even comprehend. I have nothing to identify with it. Yeah. And they became an adult at like 16 because they had to raise their two other siblings. Or 10. Because mom and dad were completely head cases and on drugs all the time or in and out of jail or something. And fortunately, I didn't see much of that, but I knew a couple of people like that. Or somebody who them and their girlfriend get pregnant in high school or whatever. And guess what? You have to be an adult now.
Yeah, you got to learn quick. Yeah, and I think that there's the struggle, kind of bringing it back to our topic of stewardship, is that a lot of times we're not talking with young people or anyone about that financial literacy. There's a lot of resources out there, but you have to kind of go do it on your own.
You have to hunt it down, yeah.
And then we're definitely usually not bringing that into the church in the sense of how do we talk about our faith informing the way we make decisions, the way we manage our finances, the way we choose to kind of put our resources behind our values. And the problem, I think, is that most religions take one of two sort of extreme approaches to basically everything. Either they tell you exactly how to live your life, and that's where you get like, the more fundamentalist the religion is, they tell you it's more rigorous. There's rules for everything. It's a little black and white,
like this is right, yes, this is right.
This is what you have to do, and it's not optional. Or you have kind of on the other side where it's either they're not going to talk about controversial issues, they're not going to talk about those different, they're not going to tell you how to live, and there's a lot more flexibility in there. And I want to say there's a lot in the middle, but there's not as much in the middle. And I think that's where I would hope, because I think that's where the United Methodist Church lives in a lot of spaces in the middle, is in the sense of saying, we're not going to tell you how to live your life. I'm not going to tell you, how you should vote and how you should date and how you should do all those things. But I'm also not going to avoid these things entirely. I think that what the theology and the identity of our denomination really leans into this idea of giving people the tools to understand how to apply their faith to their life. How they choose to do that is up to them. I think that's where the dividing line is. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. I'm going to help you understand the way you can do that in the way that it makes sense for you and your beliefs, how you understand the world and the life stage you're in and all these different things. And I think that that's where I try to take that approach in stewardship to say your faith should inform the way you make decisions. Your faith should inform the way you spend money and what you value and what you teach your children. How you do that is up to you. But I want to show you, like, what does Scripture say about it? What are the expectations? What are the guardrails? What are the non-negotiables and what are the negotiables? And I think the biggest part of it is just the first step of just talking about it, being willing to have the conversation, and people being honest with themselves to say, do you pray before a big purchase? When you're making a career decision, what weighs into that? When you're deciding where your family's going to live, what are the sort of priority of things that come into play when you do that? And for a lot of people, it's, well, I've got to be near my job because that's what's going to pay for our life. But we also want to be in a good school district for our kids, or I want to live in this part of town because I like in the city, or I like a more rural setting, or I want more land, or I want to be near whatever. I want to be near family or whatever. We usually have all these priorities. Usually when people are anecdotally sharing, hey, I'm thinking about a big decision, or I'm getting a new job, or I'm moving, very rarely do I hear anybody mention anything about God or faith. Very rarely do I say, like, you hear somebody say, well, we want to find a good school district. I've yet to hear somebody say, well, we really want to find a good church and live close to that one. I've never heard anybody say that when they're moving. I've never heard somebody say, well, I'm just really trying to pray like what community God is calling us to be a part of and how. And people just don't talk like that. And I think it's because in a lot of ways, we in the church don't challenge people to do that, and I think we come up to the edge of that, but not all the way, because we'll talk about like parenting, and we'll talk about marriage, and we'll talk about some of these other elements, but when it comes to kind of the way we make decisions in our life and the way we make decisions for our family, our faith is maybe a part of it, but it's usually below career, personal preference, school district, the square footage I want, the type of trees I want in my neighborhood, the HOA
faith is
association.
also not supposed to function in the way that those things do. Like, your job is supposed to give you a livelihood while also you're giving back your skill set to pour into something else. Faith is supposed to kind of be this thing that blankets over all of it.
Right.
It's supposed to be there through everything. It's supposed to influence how you make decisions based on, hey, it is important that we live in this area because we can do blank, blank, blankety, blank, blank, blank. It should also affect like how you spend your free time. That's one of the big ones that is hardly ever mentioned in church. Is like, hey, what are you doing with your free time? Do you ever go and volunteer? Have you ever said, you know what, instead of going to go see a movie or going out to dinner, we're going to go help people. We're going to go do something that's nice for others, and that we don't like owe them anything, but we're still going to do it. Like those kinds of things. That's where I see it. It's not like it's just another element. It's the element that kind of interweaves into all of the things that you just mentioned. Your school, your job, your family, like all those things should be interconnected, and faith being one of the binding elements of that. Yeah. If not the binding element.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's the goal, and that's where we're trying to move people toward. But that sort of holistic approach to it is, in a lot of ways, in modern American culture, the location that church has taken up is sort of akin to just one of the things in our life. And instead of it being that binding agent or that through line or the lens through which we see the world, it usually takes up the space of, this is an organization we're a part of, or this is an activity we do. It's a part of our calendar. And I think that's just a misunderstanding. One of the lines that I use all the time is the delineation between, do you want to be a disciple of Christ, or do you have a church hobby? Because I know a lot of people where church is basically, it functions in their life. And it's not that they don't have beliefs. It functions in their life like a hobby. They come to events, they participate in things, but it doesn't really inform the way they live their life. It doesn't really shape who they are as a person and what they talk about in those spaces. And the church is not a great hobby. There's better hobbies out there than the church. And so that's where I think there's a sort of a distinction and a confusion for a lot of American Christians, because faith is meant to be a lot more than just an event you show up for or something you attend. It's meant to be the lens through which you see everything. It's meant to be kind of this connecting, gel that holds your whole life together. And that requires a lot of work, and that requires, a fundamental change to how you go about making decisions. And it's a big step. So
that's deep.
It's different. It's difficult.
Church is not a hobby, or church is a bad hobby.
It's not a great hobby. There's, I don't know. There's other ones out there.
All right. Well, lot of talks of money and other cool things. So we'll see where it
we'll
goes.
get out of that. Because the first week, every year, I always try to tell people, like, you can't really be generous if you don't know where your money goes. If you don't have control over your money, it's sort of irrelevant for me to get into generosity and tithing and all these other things. Because if you're drowning in financial stress, if you don't have a budget, you don't know how to plan for anything, you're not going to be able to effectively put your resources behind your values or be generous because you don't know what you have in that space. It's like asking someone, hey, can you meet, on March 17th? And they don't have their calendar. They have no idea what they're doing on March 17th. They're not really going to be able to tell you if they can or not. And so I think that's where this first week is a lot more about, we got to take stock of where we are. And then we start to move into, okay, that's table stakes. You've got to have a handle. You can't have your life dominated by financial stress. Now, that's sort of the do no harm. Like, make sure that your finances are not causing harm in your life. Now, if you want to do good with your finances and you want to, move into that level of discipleship and following Christ, here's what that looks like. But you've got to move out of the harm state where you have no plan and your financial stress dominates your life.
As you were saying, like it's because of the internet, really, we have so many resources available to us to help us get to those places. But, and we've talked about this before, where there's great resources, there's just as many people who have no business trying to guide somebody into something, anything like, hey, let me teach you how to do blank with your money. And, there are people out there listening to
drop shipping on Amazon.
Logan Paul.
I'm going to teach you how to make a podcast.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's all get rich quick schemes. And
then there's just some people that, and this is another thing we've talked about, where there's some people that I've looked at because I grew up saying, oh, this is the person you need to go to listen to for financial advice. And in my adult years, I've started to go and listen to, I have one person specifically in mind. I'm not going to name drop, but I started to listen. I'm like, this person may have been like really good at some point, but they are so out of touch now. And because they were kind of this quintessential, this person will get you financially set. And I started listening to their podcast. I'm like, this person is terrible. Like I think they found so much success that they no longer identify with working class Americans. And so their life is just, I'm like, you are no longer the person to listen to.
With it. Well, and I think the next step of it too is a lot of our financial advice and a lot of you have to sort of ask, like, what are your values? What is your sort of guiding North Star when you're advising people? Because for most people, they want to help you, get wealthy. They want to help you save up as much for the future. And this is an interesting, it's more of it's better for a discussion than really a sermon, but, we had a discussion in a small group I was a part of one time about the scripture that says, don't build bigger barns.
Yeah.
Don't save up. Even the scripture we had on Sunday, Matthew 6, don't store it for yourself treasures on earth, but store it for yourself treasures in heaven. And so the question was, is it sinful to have a savings account? Is it sinful to save for retirement, to have investments, to pass things on to your children? Like, you're storing up treasures on earth. At what point is it but you also don't want to just be destitute and retire, have to work until you die. So like, what is the line between?
I think that's a silly question. That's like saying, you're putting too much emphasis on staying healthy and you should be focused on your spiritual health rather than your physical health. And I'm like, that's dumb. Like,
well, except like, what's the line? So if you're saving up for your retirement, do you need $3 million for that? What if you get $6 billion for your retirement? Is this still for your retirement, or are you storing up treasures on earth? Like, and what is the line? And I think that's the difference for a lot of this.
I would argue 99% of the people that that live specifically in this country will never have to ask themselves, am I saving too much? Like, no, like most people don't have that ability.
Yeah.
They just will not make enough in life, and no matter how responsible they are, unless they get crazy lucky and they bought some weird stock and it blows up and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm worth millions now. Like nobody's gonna have to ask themselves that question: am I saving too much? I'm not saying that doesn't exist, especially in this area. There's a lot of affluency in this area, but for the most part, most people are not living in a world where they're building bigger barns. Most people are just, as you were saying, they're just going day to day trying to figure out, am I doing okay?
Right. But I think it's, what are you spending that money on? And I think it's, do you have generosity built into your daily budget? What is going to happen with all that money you're saving up for the future? Does it just go to your family and yourself, or are you making end of life plans for where that money goes? And I think that's where you get into those conversations that I think are interesting, is what is the reason? And I think I heard a really great sermon once that was saying, like, what's the American dream? What are we all trying to do? Like, we're all trying to, get our kids in a good school district, so they get a good education, so they can go to a good college, that they can get a good job, and they can live in a good, safe neighborhood,
and
so they can have a good, safe family, so they can, retire to a good, safe, neighborhood, so they can die in a good, safe hospital. It's like, is the purpose of our life safety. Just to like safety and longevity? What do you want to live for 90 years for? What is the purpose of your life? What is your legacy? What are you leaving behind? What is the point of your life here on earth? Is it just to survive? And then I think we come back to the original conversation we started with, is that's the difference between us and the animals, is they live on instinct and they live for the most part just to survive. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind like being made in the image of God is our life is meant to have a purpose beyond that. And that's a question that I love to ask people, is what is the purpose of your life? What are you here to do? What drives you? What is your life's purpose? And for most people, either they don't know, or they don't have one, or it's just to keep going in that way. And I think that's where this conversation that we have during stewardship, I think, comes into play around that, is the way you spend your life, the way you spend your money, the way you spend your time. It should be in service of a purpose. It should have meaning, because that's what we're called to have. And it's not that, it's sinful to not, but I think that's, if you want to find abundant life, your life has to have purpose. Maybe you find that in your career. Maybe you find that in a hobby. Maybe you find that in your family. Maybe you find that in something else you do. There's not one way that you find purpose. And maybe it's not one thing. Maybe your purpose is just to spread hope and kindness in the world. That's great. You can do it in a million ways. Yeah. But a lot of people don't have a purpose. They're just sort of going to work, and they're paying their bills, and they're raising their kids, and they're just sort of living life. And that's where you get a lot of midlife crisis, is people live long enough and maybe things are going okay. Usually midlife crisis is not necessarily that something really happened. You just kind of look around and you're like, what am I doing all this for? Like, well, I don't even like this job. Like, what is the point of any of this? And if you don't have purpose in any way, it doesn't have, like I said, it can come in different forms. It might come through church. It might come through your career. It might come through many different things. But if you don't have that purpose, I think you leave yourself open to realizing that you're not living in that abundant life. You're just living. You're just surviving. And at some point, that's not enough. And that's where you get a lot of, well, maybe I'll buy a sports car and that'll bring me happiness. Well, like maybe for a little while, but
only if you let me drive it.
It's tough. So
all right.
It's all a part of it.
That's good. Well, we're going to keep going next week. Thanks for hanging out.
Here we are.
All right. Yeah.
Hopefully a little shorter.
Well,
we're on a roll today.
If you're watching this, what you're going to see is this. And then afterward, I'm going to post a conversation Alex and I had about annual conference and general conference and a lot of the inner workings of the Methodist Church. So that's going to come on right after I say peace out. Yeah, and then
if you're still watching,
if you want to watch that, you can. I think it's interesting personally. That's why I kept recording. And if you're interested in how the Methodist system works and what all goes on behind the scenes sometimes, tune in, stick around, keep listening. If not, we'll catch you next week.
Here we go.
Peace.
Annual conference planning. I'm the chair of the annual conference planning team. And so
Because you ran annual conference.
I did it last year. It's a little different this year. We had like co-chairs last year, and we changed the format of the structure. So it's a very different planning process, and it's in Wichita Falls. Last year was in Dallas. So there's a lot different elements to it, but it was it was a tough process last year. We were trying to figure it out for the first time.
Who was your
in our
co-chair?
new conference? There were three of us. One was a pastor named Stephanie from Abilene. The other one is a woman named Chris, a layperson from Waxahachie, I think is where she lives.
Oh.
Anyway, this year we reformatted it to be much more like a standard conference committee because the co-chair model, it's a long story. It was a merger of all the different legacy conference identities, and we tried to figure out a way to. Annual conference was essentially planned very differently in our legacy conferences, and as we merged, we tried to figure out the best way to do that. And our first attempt worked, but wasn't the best setup, so we restructured it for this year. I think it's going to be a lot better. So,
And then how often is it you do it for 2 years and then you're done being a chair? Or?
It depends. Like a lot of conference committees, you're on a 3-year schedule, like church committees. Except for one of the boards I'm on is a 12-year term. Like Henry will be in college before I roll off of that one. But
Yeah, who signed you up for that?
it's great. It's the conference board that interviews new clergy candidates. So I love the work.
okay.
It's great. But the annual conference thing it's just different. Like some people kind of fit in their roles for years and years and years. They like doing it. The chair role that I'm in, we've set up with a vice chair who sort of like will shadow me this year, and then she'll lead it next year, and there'll be a new vice chair. So I think that particular role is going to be like a 2-year. You're the vice chair, then you're the chair, then you roll off.
Who nominates people to come in when somebody rolls out?
Well, typically the conference nominations committee nominates like leaders in the conference, but for this one, I think the assistant to the bishop just picks people to serve
Andy?
on the team. Andy, yeah. And so that's how I got asked. The DSs will ask people. I don't know. They just try to fill the team. And then once we have kind of the executive team together, the vice chair and I filled the rest of the team. Like we recruited people from across the conference to fill out the rest of the team. So it's kind of it's not an official committee. So it doesn't have to go through like an election process for annual conference. It's just because the total team, including all of our planning partners, is probably like 50 people. And so it's not really it's just whoever's going to help with all these different elements. So there might be like one person who's handling this. There might be like 6 people who are coordinating ordination worship or whatever. So some people are a part of it simply because of like the role they have in the conference. Like a lot of our conference staff are on the team because that's what they do as a part of their job. If you're like the chair of the board of ordaining ministry, like we do a lot of stuff for clergy session and ordination worship that she has to be a part of because that's a part of her role as the chair of that committee. So it's different from a lot of other planning or a lot of other committees because it's sort of like half event planning, half. There's just so much that goes into annual conference, from the business of it to all the reports to the worship to ordination and clergy and voting and keynote speakers and just a million things. So it's
even
kinda
bigger
different.
now because of the 3 conferences merging. And so are you limited in like the fact that you have to find a place that can house that many people?
Yeah, and it's shifted a lot. So we used to, years ago, we would meet in convention centers, and then we were in churches for a little bit. And we were in churches for like the last 15 years.
Yeah,
But
last
since
one
we've
I went
merged-
to was over 15 years ago because it was in a convention center.
Yeah. Since we've merged, we won't fit in any of our churches. We account for about 1,500 people who come to it. And so there's just not a church that can comfortably seat 1,500 people. And then with worship, it's usually more because like people will come in just to be a part of the service. So Last year we were at SMU, which was a really tough location, just with parking, and SMU has a million activities going on.
Parking.
So that was
there. Like,
it was really tough. We won't go back to SMU, not because of SMU, just the logistics of doing all that.
I love that part
are
of
tough.
Dallas, but it's not
Yeah.
great if you're trying to get 1,500 people.
It's not great. So we're in Wichita Falls this year, which will be a drive for the vast majority of the conference, but also it is such a great venue. It's this huge convention center. We have tons of space. There's like 1,100 free parking spaces. It's great to be in a size town like that. Like Wichita Falls is good. Waco's a good size. Like you can do it in Dallas or Fort Worth, but you've got a lot of people coming in from like rural areas, and like having them navigate like traffic and parking of a big city, especially if you're in convention centers, they're usually downtown.
Yeah.
It's really intimidating for a lot of our members who they live in, Lubbock, or they live in Abilene or something, and they're just not accustomed to that. And so you really kind of want to find a city that's big enough that has enough hotel rooms and have enough, restaurants where you're not going to overload it, but also isn't like being in the park cities of Dallas last year, you get done at 5:00 and then you got to get,
good
back
luck getting
home.
anywhere.
Like you're not going to go anywhere. So
It's awful.
anyway, we're in that space and we're trying to move it around the conference since we've merged.
I mean, that seems like the smart thing to do. Like, don't let one person get lazy and just host every time. They're like, cool, this is easy because we know what to expect.
And it's also travel costs are tough. If you have to drive in, all the way across the conference every year, that doesn't seem fair. It also burns out the local resources. So like this year, we're going to use tons of volunteers from the churches in Wichita Falls because we'll be there. Next year, if we're in, I don't know where we're going to be next year, but if we're in, Fort Worth, we'll use a lot of the Fort Worth churches. If we're in, Georgetown or Waco or Dallas or Plano or whatever, you kind of get to use those different leaders, which is great because you don't burn them out, which is for like the last 15 years, we went with there were like two churches basically that hosted annual conference every year. It just went back and forth. And that like really wears on the staff and the church when you're doing it all the time. So.
The last annual conference I went to, the last one I went to it was at First Methodist Dallas. And gosh, that had to have been 2010.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
It's been a while. Anyway.
So for the uninitiated, what is the goal? What are you trying to accomplish at an annual conference?
Annual conference is sort of the primary organizing body. I mean, I'm going to get into all of how Polity works, but everything is kind of broke down into different regions, from globally down into, continents and countries and regions within that. But the annual conference is the major thing. So like all the clergy under appointment are moved around within those conference boundaries. So I can be reappointed anywhere within our Horizon Texas conference. You have a bishop is over each annual conference, and the annual conference meeting itself is kind of the legislative body. A lot of United Methodist polity mirrors American governance because it was essentially established as its own denomination through the Revolutionary War, because we were a part of the Church of England. And then when we were no longer a part of England, we can't be a part of the Church of England anymore. So that's when Methodism became its own thing. So when they were forming the initial governance of the church, it mirrored the formation of the American government. So we have a judicial council, which is just like the Supreme Court. We have a council of bishops, which is the executive wing of the executive branch, and then general conference is like Congress. So annual conference is sort of like your state legislature. So we do where we can pass resolutions. It's where we ordain new clergy. Clergy work for the annual conference. So like I'm appointed here at Creekwood, and Creekwood pays my salary, but I'm an employee of the conference. And so they move us around in that space. I'm a member of the conference. I'm not a member of any local church as a clergy person. And so it's like the annual conference is sort of like, that's where your insurance all goes through the annual conference, all the legal and financial things. The annual conference is kind of the primary organizing unit. So it's the one time every year where we all get together. It's every clergy in the conference and an equal number of lay members. And so it's about 1,500 people in our current makeup, retired clergy included. And so it's where we ordain new clergy. It's where we celebrate the retirement of clergy. It's where we do a memorial service for people who have passed away in the last year. We have keynote speakers. There's our bishop speaks a lot. We have reports from all of our conference directors, and there's a young person's report. There's a clergy women's report. There's a deacon report. I mean, there's all these different reports of kind of what the conference has done over the last year and what our hopes are for the future. We always have a keynote speaker and a guest bishop who comes and preaches, or some different kind of things like that. We have breakout toolbox sessions and a bunch of stuff. So it's sort of a necessary thing, and some of it is very tedious. You have to pass the budget, and you vote on insurance things, and there's a lot of tedium that goes into it. But there's also a lot of great things. It's the one time a year you see your other clergy friends and churches you used to work at, and everyone comes together, and it's where you celebrate retirements and ordination, and there's a lot of really cool things. So it kind of depends on who you are and what that year means to you. But for some years, you go and it's like, well, I just got to go, I'm not really doing anything. It's a business meeting and it's a little boring. And then some years, like, you're getting ordained and it's one of the most important, memorable experiences of your life in that space, and everything in between.
So you go to General Conference?
I've never, I stopped in for a day when it was in Fort Worth, like 20 some years ago. But I've never been to General Conference. It's usually far away. In the last few years, it was in Minnesota and Portland and just kind of all over the place. So, no, and they live stream it. So I watch it, but I've never been.
Yeah, and that one's more just like the dealing with the Methodist Church from like 10,000 feet.
Kind of globally. Well, and it's 2 weeks long, and a lot of it is super boring. So there are some fun elements, but for the most part, General Conference, by and large, you're there for 2 weeks. So just to drop in and visit.
Well, in the last 20 years, really 15 years, there's been all of the issues with fighting what ultimately landed in the church splitting with the GMC and.
Yeah, it's the primary legislative body, so they deal with all the big constitutional amendments. And
I heard it was really different this last one after the disaffiliations, and then just the general atmosphere was so different, and there was there wasn't as much nervousness about are we going to finally do it this year, because they had been trying to figure out the same problem for 4, maybe 5 conferences, general conferences, and that's every 4 years. and they couldn't get it done year after, 4 year after 4 year after 4 year. And so it was just kind of one of those things where and then finally something happens, and then disaffiliation goes on, which there's a lot of different opinions about that. And overall it's kind of sad, but then you have general conference that comes together, and everybody I know that went was it was so different, and everybody was kind of felt like there was a weight lifted.
Well, because before, leading up to that, and there still is a lot of politicking that goes on. I mean, it's the primary legislative body, and so you have people, drafting legislation and whipping votes and trying to gain support for things. But because it was so big and so divisive and so... there was so much anger, and there was so much mistrust, that there were so many backroom deals and conversations and just a lot of politicking in a way that wasn't really healthy or helpful, because we had kind of come to the impasse. And now that the logjam had been broken through a painful process, but it was never going to be easy, better than a lot of denominations. I mean, even though a new denomination split off, it wasn't like the denomination broke in half. A lot of the Lutheran Church and the Presbyterian Church, a lot of churches have. And so anyhow, now that we were able to kind of move past a lot of that fighting, not all of it, but a lot of it, it kind of, allowed you to move into a new season. So it's... I don't know. I wasn't there, but I heard similar reports.
I mean, like you said, they live stream it. I think I had it on. This was 3 of them ago. They were live streaming it, and I had a couple of friends that were there, and one of them was basically live tweeting the entire thing.
Yeah. Well, and I've got some friends, and my sister's been a delegate for the last however many years. And so people who are there, like you, if you know them, they're sending you like what's going on and the updates. Or I would often get texts that's like, you should turn on the live stream, because you're not going to live stream all day for 2 straight weeks. Like there's no way. And a lot of the stuff they're discussing, it's just reports, or, it's an update on the new insurance program they're adopting or the new pension program or whatever. And it's just not really, it's important, but it's not interesting to just watch as a spectator. But sometimes like we're discussing a constitutional amendment, or there's a really inspiring speech happening or something is going on. And so usually that's where all the clergy text message groups are going on at the same time. And there's usually somebody watching, at all times, or someone's there and they'll send you a message and say, hey, you should go watch right now. And so everybody goes and jumps on. But it is funny in those moments, because you'll see the like live stream numbers. They'll go from like,
they spike.
Yeah, it's like, 2,000, 30,000. And then, they kind of come back down. So anyway.